Every afternoon, just as the school bell rang and the chatter of students spilled into the streets of Springfield, 11-year-old Tyler Morgan followed the same route home. He walked past the local bakery, always lingering just a moment by the window, then made a left toward Maple Park, a quiet, open space known mostly for its old oak trees and an aging wooden bench that had long lost its shine. It was on that bench, tucked beneath the shelter of a sagging maple tree, where Tyler paused every day with brown paper bag in hand. No one paid much attention to him. Most afternoons, the park was nearly empty, save for a jogger or a parent with a stroller. But someone had noticed. Officer Mark Reynolds, a veteran of Springfield's modest police force, had walked a patrol route to the park for nearly 2 decades. He prided himself on knowing his town, not just its streets, but its people. And lately, he had been noticing Tyler. It wasn't the boy's appearance that drew Mark's attention. Tyler was neat, always in a clean shirt and jeans, his backpack zipped tight, his sneakers worn but not tattered. It was what he did, or rather, what he didn't do, that stirred Mark's instincts. Each day, Tyler approached the bench with quiet purpose. He would glance around, not nervously but carefully, then kneel down and slide the brown bag underneath the far edge of the bench. It was a motion so deliberate, so practiced, that Mark couldn't believe it was anything less than a routine. Once the bag was in place, Tyler would sit for a few moments, staring straight ahead at nothing in particular. He never opened the bag, never ate from it, never took it home. At first, Mark chalked it up to childish behavior. Maybe it was a game. Maybe the boy was feeding a squirrel or playing a prank. But it happened again and again. For nearly 2 weeks, Tyler left the same kind of bag, always folded tightly at the top, always placed in the same spot, always left behind. One crisp Thursday afternoon, Mark leaned against a lamppost at the park's edge, arms crossed, trying to make sense of it. The sun was low, painting golden lines through the trees. He watched as Tyler, once again, approached the bench, set down the bag, and sat. There was no hesitation in the boy's movement, no trace of guilt or fear, just quiet resolve. Mark's curiosity gnawed at him. He had seen countless patterns in human behavior over the years, some harmless, some leading to darker truths. This felt different. It was subtle, unspoken. There was no law being broken, no crime in progress. But Mark had learned that sometimes the most heartbreaking things weren't hidden behind sirens and calls for help. They were silent, like a boy who gave up his lunch every day without explanation. That evening, after Tyler had left the park, Mark walked to the bench. The brown paper bag was still there. He crouched down slowly, hesitating before reaching for it. It felt wrong, somehow, to invade the strange ritual. But he wasn't just a cop, he was a father, too. And something about Tyler's solemn habit whispered that someone might be in need. He gently lifted the bag. It was heavier than expected. Inside, wrapped in a neat napkin, was a sandwich, peanut butter and jelly, cut in halves. Next to it, a small apple and a granola bar. Everything was fresh, not discarded leftovers, not scraps, but a full lunch packed with care. Mark didn't take it. He placed the bag right back where it had been, untouched. As he stood, he looked around the park once more. The wind rustled the leaves above. A squirrel darted across the path. But nothing and no one seemed to take the lunch. He returned the next day. Same routine. Tyler dropped the bag, waited, and left. And this time, Mark stayed behind longer. From a discreet distance, he waited in the shadow of the trees, his eyes trained on the bench. 15 minutes passed, then 20, and then movement. A figure emerged from the wooded edge of the park, thin and hunched. His clothes were layered and worn, his beard tangled, face sunburnt and eyes downcast. He looked around once, then shuffled toward the bench. When he saw the bag, his steps quickened slightly, not desperate but grateful. He picked it up with trembling hands and cradled it against his chest like something fragile. Then, slowly, he sat down on the bench, his expression softened with quiet relief. Mark stood still, hidden by the trees, his jaw tight. He watched as the man unwrapped the sandwich carefully, savoring each bite like it was a feast. That night, Mark couldn't sleep. The image of the boy placing his lunch, and the man embracing it like salvation played over and over in his mind. It wasn't random. It wasn't a coincidence. Tyler was feeding someone every single day. But why? Was the man a stranger? A forgotten neighbor? Was Tyler doing this out of guilt, duty, or love? Mark had seen many acts of charity, but never one this quiet, this sustained, and from a child. Something told him that whatever the reason, it wasn't simple, and Mark Reynolds had never walked away from a mystery without first understanding the truth. The next afternoon, he returned to the park, not as a cop, just as a man watching a boy with too much weight on his shoulders, trying to figure out where that weight had come from, and maybe, just maybe, how to help carry it. The following day, Mark arrived at Maple Park earlier than usual, this time dressed in plain clothes, his badge tucked out of sight. There was something about watching from a uniformed stance that felt too official, too intrusive. What he needed now was understanding, not authority. He leaned against a tree across the park, arms folded, and waited. When Tyler emerged from the corner of Lexington Avenue, backpack slung over one shoulder and that same brown paper bag clutched in one hand, Mark's focus sharpened. Tyler didn't hesitate as he walked to the bench. He looked straight ahead, eyes scanning the path with familiarity, not urgency. He wasn't worried about being followed. He had no reason to be. He believed, like most children do, that the world only noticed when it had to. Carefully, he knelt and placed the bag beneath the bench once more, then sat for a moment, as he always did. Mark could see the slight movement of his jaw, a habit perhaps, or maybe silent thoughts pressing against lips too young to speak them. A few minutes later, Tyler stood and left, heading down the opposite path. Mark didn't follow the lunch this time. He followed the boy. He kept a reasonable distance, letting Tyler disappear around corners before catching up again. The boy's steps weren't fast, but they weren't leisurely either. He had a purpose. Mark trailed him for several blocks, past rows of modest houses, cracked sidewalks, and the faded awning of an old corner store. When Tyler paused outside the front window of Carson's Market, Mark stopped behind the side of a delivery van, watching. Tyler stared at a small white sign in the window that read, "Lunch Combos, $4.50. His face didn't shift much, but Mark had read the disappointment in his eyes. Not the kind that comes from a mistreat or a forgotten promise, but a deeper, quieter kind, a recognition of something just out of reach. Tyler pressed his hands into his pockets, glanced once more at the sign, then turned and began to walk back toward the park. Mark waited until Tyler was 2 blocks ahead before moving. He watched the boy cross the intersection, make a turn, and disappear down a tree-lined street toward what Mark assumed must be his neighborhood. There was no fanfare in the way Tyler moved. No theatrical sadness, no signals begging for attention. Just a quiet resignation to a routine that should have belonged to someone far older. Back at the precinct that evening, Mark reviewed the events of the day without writing a report. There was nothing to file, no law broken, no citizen complaint. And yet, the weight of what he had seen wouldn't leave him. He asked around discreetly, calling in a few favors with a school resource officer and a social worker he trusted. Tyler Morgan, age 11, lives with his mother, Lisa Morgan, in a rental duplex near Pine Street. Father deceased, automobile accident 3 years ago. No known behavioral issues, solid grades, a few attendance slips, but nothing alarming. That night, Mark sat in his car outside the Morgan's modest home, engine off, watching through the windshield as a warm yellow light glowed behind the living room curtains. He wasn't sure what he expected to see, maybe signs of chaos, of distress, but there was nothing, just stillness. Stillness in the kind of house where people tried their best in silence. The next afternoon, Mark returned to the park again. He watched Tyler place the lunch, sit quietly and leave. He waited, and again, the same man from before appeared, his movements slow but precise, his eyes scanning the area before lifting the bag as if it were something sacred. Mark stepped forward this time, not enough to be threatening, but enough to be seen. The man froze. Mark raised one hand slightly. "I'm not here to stop you," he said calmly. The man didn't speak at first. He looked down at the bag, then back up at Mark, his expression a mixture of guilt and confusion. "I just want to understand," Mark added, his voice soft. The man clutched the bag tighter. "Don't take it. Please." "I won't," Mark said, taking a step closer. "Do you know the boy who leaves it?" The man looked away. "You don't need to be involved. This isn't hurting anyone." Mark studied him. He was older than he had first seemed, mid-40s maybe. His jacket was several sizes too large, his boots frayed, the laces mismatched. But his posture was not that of someone broken. There was dignity in the way he held the bag. "You know him, don't you?" Mark asked. The man hesitated. "He doesn't know I've seen him," he murmured. "I told him not to look for me. Told him I was gone." Mark felt the air shift. The pieces slowly were beginning to fall into place. "He thinks I'm better off this way," the man continued, his voice low, "that if he helps like this, I'll stay hidden and safe." Mark didn't press further. He nodded once, then turned and walked away. But the next day, he waited for Tyler outside school. He approached gently, hands in his jacket pockets. "Tyler, right?" The boy stopped mid-step, unsure. "Yes, sir. I see you sometimes at Maple Park. I'm Officer Reynolds. I used to patrol that area." Tyler nodded, his eyes narrowing slightly, unsure whether this was praise or trouble. "I noticed something," Mark continued, crouching slightly to meet his eye. "You've been doing something kind, leaving lunch for someone." Tyler's face froze. He looked down, gripping the strap of his backpack. "You're not in trouble," Mark said quickly. "I just want to talk." Tyler hesitated, then glanced around, as if making sure no one from school could hear. "Please don't tell my mom." Mark nodded. "Okay, I won't. Not unless you want me to." Tyler looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, as if holding back tears that had become too familiar. "He's my uncle," he said quietly. "Uncle Joe. He helped take care of me after Dad died. But then he lost everything. Got sick, couldn't pay the hospital. He disappeared. Told us not to look for him." Mark listened in silence. "He thinks we'd be better off without him," Tyler went on. "But I saw him one day behind the store. He was sleeping under cardboard. I knew it was him. I didn't say anything. I wanted to help. But Mom doesn't have enough. I didn't want her to worry." Mark took a slow breath. The weight of the boy's burden hit him hard. He had known pain, seen it in all forms, but hearing it in the voice of an 11-year-old, carefully rationing his meals to care for a man too proud to come home, was something else entirely. "Thank you for telling me," Mark said softly. "That was brave." Tyler nodded once. "Can you just not tell anyone? Please." Mark looked into the boy's eyes and saw the struggle there. Not just to protect a secret, but to hold together something fragile. A thread of loyalty and love spun thin by silence. "I'll think about what to do," he said gently. "But I promise I'll be careful." Tyler gave a small, almost invisible nod before turning and walking away, his steps slower than usual, as if part of the burden had been spoken into the air, but not yet lifted. The days that followed were marked by a silence between Mark and Tyler. Not one born of avoidance, but a quiet understanding. The boy had trusted him with something delicate, and Mark had chosen to honor that trust without intrusion. Yet the weight of what he now knew didn't ease with time. It deepened. The story Tyler had whispered in the schoolyard had rooted itself in Mark's thoughts, each detail sharpening with the memory of Uncle Joe's weathered face and guarded presence. It wasn't simply homelessness. It wasn't even illness. It was exile, chosen, yes, but no less painful. On a damp Monday morning, with clouds stretching low and gray above Springfield, Mark stood in the records room at the precinct. He didn't ask permission to access the files. He didn't need to. Joe Cartwright had once lived on Cherry Street. His name came up on an outdated municipal employment record as a certified auto mechanic with prior licenses at 2 now-defunct garages. No criminal record, no outstanding warrants, just a sharp line of silence after the year Tyler's father died, the same year Joe vanished from official trace. Mark closed the folder slowly, staring at the name for a moment longer before filing it back. He confirmed what he already suspected. Joe hadn't disappeared because he was running from something illegal. He had simply receded, like fog after sunrise, slipping from one life into another, Later that afternoon, Mark waited near the park again. Not for Tyler, but for Joe. When the man finally emerged, thin and wrapped in the same layers as before, Mark stepped out from the tree line and approached slowly. Joe paused when he saw him, shoulders tensing as if bracing for confrontation. "I don't want trouble," Joe said plainly, his voice gravelly but clear. "I'm not here to give it," Mark replied, "but I'd like to talk." Joe hesitated, then gave a short nod and walked toward the edge of the park, away from the bench. They stopped near the low fence by the trailhead. "Tyler told me about you," Mark said, watching Joe's face tighten. "I asked him not to," Joe muttered, more pain than angry. He didn't want to, but he's a kid carrying too much on his shoulders. Joe turned his face away. "I never wanted him involved. But he is, and not in the way you think. He's not doing it because he feels obligated. He's doing it because he loves you." Joe exhaled, the sound like a broken tire leaking air. "That boy's got too much of his father in him." "He's got a lot of strength," Mark agreed, "but he's still a boy, and he's skipping meals, pretending to eat at school just to make sure you get something." Joe shook his head slowly, the shame washing across him like a tide. He didn't try to resist. "I told Lisa I couldn't be a burden anymore. I watched her struggle after the accident. Tyler needed consistency, not a broken man living on her couch." "You think disappearing gave him peace?" Mark asked quietly. "Because it didn't. It gave them a hole they've been trying to fill, without knowing how." Joe didn't respond. His eyes followed the cracks in the sidewalk beneath them. Mark softened his tone. "You're not saving anyone by starving alone." Joe's voice cracked. "I've got nothing left to offer." "You've got family," Mark countered, "and a boy who looks up to you more than anyone. That's not nothing." Joe said nothing for a long time. Then he lifted his gaze. "She wouldn't want me back." "You're wrong," Mark said, "but you don't have to take my word for it." That evening, after a quiet dinner alone in his apartment, Mark drove to the Morgan household. Lisa opened the door, her tired expression brightening faintly at the familiar face. "Officer Reynolds?" she asked, surprised. "Everything okay?" "I'd like to talk," Mark said gently. "May I come in?" Lisa led him to the modest living room, where folded laundry sat on the coffee table and a muted television played an old sitcom. She offered him coffee, which he declined. Then she sat across from him, her eyes expectant, her posture guarded. "It's about Tyler," Mark began, watching her shoulders stiffen. "He's not in trouble." She let out a breath. "Thank God. I've been worried about him lately. He's been quiet. He's been carrying something heavy," Mark said carefully, "and I think you deserve to know." He proceeded slowly, weaving the facts with caution, never betraying Tyler's plea for secrecy, but also never watering down the truth. He told her about the lunches, about the man in the park, about the silent connection between them. He told her the man was someone she once knew well. When the name left his lips, Lisa's breath caught. "Joe!" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "My Joe." Mark nodded. "He's been living rough, close by, and Tyler found him." Lisa's hands covered her mouth, and her eyes welled with tears before a word could form. She shook her head slowly, in disbelief, in recognition, in guilt. "I thought he was dead. I thought he just gave up on us." "He thought he was protecting you," Mark said. "Thought it would hurt less if he stayed away." Lisa stood up abruptly and walked to the kitchen, pacing in small circles. "He could have come to me. I would have helped. I would have found a way." Mark watched her, letting the emotions churn as they needed to. He didn't want to be a burden. Lisa turned back, wiping her cheeks with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. "Where is he?" "In the park. Same place Tyler's been leaving the lunches. He's there most evenings." Lisa sat again, this time differently. Her posture was straighter. There was clarity in her eyes now, a decision forming. "I want to see him," she said. "I want to go tonight." Mark nodded. "Then let's go together." That night, as darkness settled over Springfield, Mark drove Lisa to Maple Park. The wind had picked up, rustling leaves across the path as they approached the bench. Joe was already there, unwrapping a sandwich with slow, deliberate hands. When he saw them, his body went still. Lisa took a step forward. "Joe!" He looked up. Her voice hit him like a storm. "I thought you were gone," she said, her voice shaking. "I didn't want to drag you down with me," Joe said quietly. Lisa moved closer. "You didn't. You left a hole we never knew how to fill." Joe stood slowly, the sandwich forgotten on the bench. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came. Then, after a pause that held 1,000 unspoken apologies, he whispered, "I missed you." She took his hand. "You're coming home." Joe hesitated, but didn't pull away. Behind them, Mark remained still, watching a family begin to mend in the same place where one boy had refused to let them unravel completely. In the days that followed the emotional reunion at Maple Park, the world seemed to shift slightly for everyone involved. Though there were no dramatic declarations, no sudden transformations, something had opened, a door long sealed by fear and guilt, now quietly ajar. Joe didn't return with Lisa that first night. Even after holding her hand, even after hearing her say those words, "You're coming home," he had pulled back gently, thanking her, but insisting he wasn't ready to walk back through that threshold. There was too much shame still tangled in his bones, and the years on the street had stripped him of the ability to simply resume life as it was before. But what Joe did agree to was a conversation, and then another, and another after that. Mark acted as a quiet bridge between the two siblings, giving them space when needed, intervening only to ease tension or translate what neither could quite find the words to say. Tyler remained largely unaware of the grown-up negotiations happening around him. Lisa, determined not to betray the trust her son had placed in secrecy, kept his role in Joe's rediscovery private. She told him, simply, that she had learned something important and that soon things might start to change for all of them. One afternoon, Mark visited Joe at the edge of the municipal shelter on East Camden. After much persuasion, Joe had agreed to spend a few nights there. It wasn't ideal, but was cleaner and safe in the streets, and it gave him access to resources he had long ignored. The shelter administrator, an ex-military man named Carl with a scar above his brow and a no-nonsense demeanor, had taken particular interest in Joe's case. When Mark explained Joe's past work as a mechanic, Carl nodded thoughtfully and made a call to a local garage owner he knew, a man named Pete, who had a reputation for giving second chances. When Mark brought this up with Joe, the man's first instinct was to refuse. "I haven't worked with a real wrench in over 4 years," he said, his voice edged with bitterness. "My hands are stiff. My knees crack when I bend. Who the hell's going to trust me to fix a brake line?" "Pete might," Mark replied. "He doesn't care if you limp a little or if your grip isn't what it used to be. He cares that you know your way around an engine and that you show up." Joe stared at the pavement for a long moment, then muttered, "I'll think about it." By the following week, he had shown up for an interview. Pete gave him 2 days of probationary work. Basic oil changes, tire rotations, nothing too demanding. But when Joe spotted a teenager mishandling a carburetor, he stepped in quietly, guided the boy's hands, and corrected the issue without condescension. Pete saw it. Joe was hired by the end of the shift. Meanwhile, Lisa started rearranging things at home. She pulled boxes from the garage, sorted through old photographs, and cleared space in the guest room. It wasn't a declaration, but a preparation. She knew Joe wasn't ready yet, but he might be soon. More importantly, Tyler had begun to sense that something was unfolding, even if no one had spoken out loud. His mother had started humming again while she cooked, and Mark's patrol car showed up near the neighborhood more often, not out of duty, but as a quiet presence. The boy had grown used to carrying the weight of an adult world on his small shoulders, but for the first time in a long while, he felt it lightening. The breakthrough came one Thursday evening, when Joe walked into the garage with grease on his hands and a folded piece of paper in his back pocket. He stopped by the shelter only to pack up the few belongings he had stashed in a plastic bin. Then, with hesitant steps, he made his way to Lisa's house and knocked on the door. Tyler answered. There was a long pause before either spoke. Joe's voice cracked as he said, "Hey, kid." Tyler stared for a moment, then launched forward, wrapping his arms tightly around Joe's waist without a word. The man froze for a second, overcome, then lowered himself and hugged his nephew back with trembling arms. Lisa stepped into the doorway, her eyes filled with silent tears. She didn't rush them. She simply stood there, bearing witness. Joe moved in that night, not permanently, not yet, but enough to stop sleeping in alleyways. Lisa insisted he take the guest room, and Joe agreed under one condition, that he paid rent once he got his first paycheck. She tried to argue, but he stood firm. He didn't want charity. He wanted dignity. And Lisa, knowing her brother's pride, relented. Later that week, Mark dropped by with a stack of forms, applications for transitional housing assistance, veteran support. Even though Joe had never served, Carr had found a civilian mechanical skills training grant that could qualify him, and a card for a therapist who specialized in reintegration support. Joe took the stack with a mix of gratitude and suspicion. It wasn't that he didn't appreciate the help. It was that the idea of rebuilding from scratch was still daunting. "I don't know if I can do all of this," he admitted. "You don't have to do it all at once," Mark replied. "Just do the next thing." That night, the three of them, Joe, Lisa, and Tyler, sat together on the back porch, eating sandwiches and listening to cicadas hum through the warm air. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No one made speeches. But when Joe laughed at something Tyler said, really laughed, with his shoulders shaking and his eyes crinkling, Lisa looked over at her son and gave him a quiet nod. Tyler smiled back, wide and bright, his small shoulders relaxing into the wooden slats of the bench. Mark, watching from the driveway before he left, realized something. The boy who had once sat silently on that old park bench, giving away his meal in secret, had done something extraordinary. Without raising his voice, without demanding attention, he had restored a man's dignity, reunited a family, and reminded everyone around him that the smallest acts of kindness could set massive things in motion. Joe hadn't fully healed. The road ahead would still carry shadows. But for the first time in years, he was walking that road with people beside him, and that made all the difference. It was a Saturday morning in late spring when Tyler returned to Maple Park, this time not out of secrecy or ritual, but by invitation. The air was warm and clean, with the soft scent of fresh-cut grass and the distant chatter of children weaving through the trees. He clutched his brown paper bag again, but there was no weight of guilt in his fingers, no knot of worry in his chest. The lunch wasn't a silent gift anymore, it was simply lunch. And this time, he wasn't alone. Beside him walked Joe, freshly shaven, his clothes clean and fitted, his step steady as still slightly cautious. There was a confidence to his gait that hadn't been there before, but also a quiet humility. The scars of his years on the street hadn't vanished, but they no longer defined him. His job at the garage was going well. He'd even been trusted with training a new hire, something Pete had suggested casually, knowing it would challenge Joe's sense of purpose. Joe had met the task with determination, even if he still joked awkwardly about being out of touch with modern diagnostics. Pete, gruff as ever, had only nodded and said, "You've got good hands. That's what matters." They reached the old bench under the maple tree, still weathered, still a bit uneven. Tyler sat first, setting his lunch on his lap, and looking up at his uncle with a grin. "Feels weird sitting here with you," he said. Joe chuckled and eased himself down beside the boy. "Feels good, though." From a few yards away, Mark watched them in silence. He hadn't planned to stay long. Just wanted to stop by, say hello, maybe grab a coffee with Joe if the timing felt right. But as he watched the two figures on the bench, the way their bodies leaned subtly toward each other, the comfort in their silence, he decided to give them the moment without interruption. Tyler unwrapped his sandwich carefully, taking a bite before speaking again. "Did you ever think we'd be doing this? Just eating lunch here like it's normal." Joe looked at the trees, their green leaves shimmering under the sunlight. "I thought about it," he said. "A lot, but I didn't think I deserved it." Tyler didn't respond right away. He chewed slowly, then glanced over. "You do." Joe's eyes misted briefly, and he nodded, placing a hand gently on Tyler's shoulder. "Thanks, kid." The park had changed for both of them. What had once been a place of silent sacrifice was now a place of quiet restoration. The bench where Joe had once waited for survival had become a meeting place, a center of reconnection. Tyler came there often after school now, not to leave anything behind, but to meet his uncle, share stories, and just sit. Sometimes Joe brought the lunch. Sometimes Tyler did. Sometimes neither of them ate and just talked. The bench had become more than just a bench. It was a symbol, not of what was lost, but of what had been found again. Lisa joined them that afternoon, walking up the path with a tote bag filled with lemonade and extra sandwiches. She wore a simple sun hat, her hair pulled back, and her eyes softened when she saw them. Joe stood as she approached, helping her with the bag and setting it on the grass beside the bench. The family fell into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. They didn't talk much about the past, not because it had been forgotten, but because it no longer defined the present. Mark eventually joined them, invited over by Lisa with a warm smile and a cup of lemonade. He sat on the edge of the bench while Joe pulled over a second one from a nearby path. The four of them talked about mundane things: Tyler's upcoming school project, a movie that had just come out, how the garage was struggling to keep up with summer car repairs. It was ordinary. It was unremarkable. And yet, it carried the profound beauty of a story that could have ended in tragedy but chose, through quiet persistence, to move toward healing instead. At one point, a little girl passed by with her mother, eyeing the group on the benches curiously. She paused, pointing at Joe with innocent boldness. "Is that your grandpa?" she asked Tyler, loud enough for everyone to hear. Tyler laughed. "No, that's my uncle, but he's cooler than a grandpa." Joe raised an eyebrow, mock offended. "Hey now, don't age me before my time." The mother smiled apologetically, but the group only laughed. The moment was light, joyful in its simplicity. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the lawn, Mark stood and dusted off his pants. "I should get going," he said, glancing at his watch. "Back to pretending I have paperwork to catch up on." Lisa teased him gently. "You mean back to pretending the station can function without you?" He smiled but didn't argue. Instead, he looked at Joe, then at Tyler. "You two make a good team," he said. "We do," Joe replied, his tone humble. "Thanks for seeing that before I did." Mark gave a small nod, the kind that carried more weight than a handshake. Then he turned and walked down the path, leaving the family to the evening light. That night, as the stars began to appear above the quiet streets of Springfield, Joe sat on the porch of Lisa's house, a mug of coffee in his hand. Tyler was inside, finishing his homework, and Lisa was folding laundry in the next room. Joe stared out into the night, the hum of cicadas rising like a familiar song. He wasn't sure when exactly everything had begun to shift, whether it was that moment on the bench, or the first time Pete tossed him a wrench without comment, or the quiet way Mark had treated him like a man instead of a case. But the shift had happened. For the first time in years, he believed he had a future, and all because a boy had refused to give up on him. The next morning, Joe returned to the garage early, helping prep tools and sweep out the bay. Pete handed him a clipboard and muttered something about inventory. Joe got to work without hesitation. Back at school, Tyler gave a presentation on unsung heroes, choosing not a firefighter or a famous inventor, but someone who helped me when I didn't even know I needed help. He never said the name, but his classmates listened closely. In the following weeks, the bench at Maple Park became something of a landmark. Locals noticing the family who now gathered there regularly, the laughter that replaced the quiet solemnity. It wasn't marked with a plaque or a sign, but people remembered, people noticed. The kindness of one boy, a cop who listened, a sister who forgave, and a man who found the strength to come back, all converged at that single point under a maple tree. The park was the same, but no one ever looked at that old bench the same way again.